Marvel has finally done it! They stepped away from their regular formula and did something different with Werewolf by Night. It was awesome. Everything about it was just so different from what we're used to seeing. There were still jokes, but they worked with the special that they were presenting. Like, the different color was really cool, like how it's all black and white. It gave you that classic monster movie vibes, which was really cool. And on top of it, you're gonna love Elsa Bloodstone. And before we get into everything, if you guys like nerdy content, Marvel, DC, anime, make sure you hit the subscribe button because I'm always talking about that stuff. We're going to be talking spoilers, so if you haven't seen the special yet, save this video for later, and we'll be talking about everything that happened during the special. We got comic origins, we have little Easter eggs, and we have different monsters that might have shown up. And my review, of course. So let's go into it and talk about everything from Werewolf by Night. Let's start off with the review. Like I was saying, it is absolutely fantastic. It's something different. It did not shy away from the blood and gore, which was cool. I mean, you didn't really get to see as much gore as you did blood, but still, with Marvel movies, you don't really see a lot of blood. And this, Werewolf by Night was just slaughtering people. And so was Elsa Bloodstone. She was slashing and hacking as she went through this movie. And she did pretty good, and she's pretty badass. She easily became one of my favorite characters in this, and Man-Thing, came a close second, because Man-Thing is pretty goddamn awesome in this as well. Never thought I'd see Man-Thing in an MCU project. Honestly, he's weird and I love it. I thought the score was done really well too. The music just added to it, added to that kind of like that creepy classic vibe. It reminded me of monster movies that would have taken place in like the 30s and 40s era. Obviously it looks better, but it just, it was the vibe it was given. There were also like minor jump scares, which weren't really like too scary, but it was still interesting to get the like little startle for a second when something would jump out at you. Overall, I thought this was pretty awesome, but let's jump into the comic book stuff and, breaking down the special bit by bit. In the very beginning, we had a brand new Marvel logo where the Werewolf by Night is just slashing through it, and it's just it changes into black and white. The music changes, and it's just different from what we're used to, which kind of sets the tone for what the special is going to be like. And then on top of it, we get into it, and it starts explaining who the monster hunters are, shows the Avengers, and then shows that the Bloodstone family has been hunting monsters and that there's other hunters that hunt these monsters that the regular heroes don't know about. Which I'm sure like Doctor Strange knows, Blade knows of course, but Iron Man and the Hulk, there's no way they know about this stuff. It'll be interesting when they do find out about this side of the universe. When they have the Bloodstone in this as well, like the Bloodstone is glowing red, it's the only light in this whole special, for the beginning of it anyways. It reminded me of Wanda's Chaos Magic, and that's what I was thinking they were doing with it. Because in the comics, the Bloodstone grants the user superhuman strength, durability, speed, reflexes, stamina, as well as immortality, and a regenerative healing factor. It also prevents poisons and from being turned into a vampire. And it can also be used to resurrect people. But I think it's being changed slightly because Ulysses wouldn't be dead then.
However, Elsa's stepmother does mention the fact that it gives longevity, protection, and strength, so it could still have the similar powers with some new ones added in.
Which I thought was pretty cool, and I'm sure we'll get to see way more of it because Elsa Bloodstone is now in the MCU and there's no way she's not coming back. Because I could totally see her coming back in like a Midnight Suns movie, a Blade movie, or another project that has to do with the supernatural. When they're in the building and all the hunters are gathering, you got all these monster heads that are above on the mantles, and I couldn't really figure out which some were. One looked like a Wendigo head, one looked like Bigfoot, and the other one could have been like this vampire-esque monster, because it kind of just reminded me of something I'd seen out of like a vampire horror film, like, but not your classic vampires, one that's like more mutated, which I thought was interesting. And I like how we get introduced to all the different hunters, and they all look like hunters except for Jack. Jack does not look like a hunter, and it's very prominent from the very beginning of which kind of character this is. And I thought it was really interesting because I didn't know he was Jack at first either until he finally said his name. I'm like, oh, there we go. There's Werewolf by Night. And the reason that Jack is a werewolf in the comics, because it started with one of his descendants, Jacob Rossoff, went to go kill Dracula, got bitten by Dracula's werewolf servant, and then got turned into a werewolf. But it didn't affect his kids at the time because they were already of age, they were already born. However, certain conditions would activate the curse on his descendant. Later in the 1950s, Gregory Russoff acquired a copy of the Darkhold, which ended up activating the secret origin of turning into a werewolf. And then later down the road, when Jack Russell hit 18, the curse struck him and he became Werewolf by Night. There's a lot more to his history, so if you want me to get more into it, let me know down in the comments below. And I love how Elsa makes her appearance too, and she just drags her chair and makes everyone like stop talking, and just, she's a smart ass, she's sarcastic, and that's what I would assume Elsa would act like from reading the comics, and I love her character already, and I cannot wait for her to show up more in the MCU. They even talk about how Elsa hasn't been around for the last like 20 years. She left the family, and in the comics, she had a strict father who sent her on rite of passages, had his daughter fight a blight beast, which I think they did mention in the show, but I might be going crazy at that point because I couldn't find it again after I went skimming through it. And after her father dies in the comics, she took over the former family estate, which it looks like she does exactly that same thing in the show. So she'll be taking over her estate, and she'll be monster hunting, probably the bad monsters, and helping the good ones as she goes forward in the MCU. And I like how Ulysses animated his dead body to give the speech about what to do. I just thought that was really funny, and it felt like someone who's like an egotistical ass would do. And I like how he forced everyone to listen to his animated body talk, which was cool in itself because we're dealing with monsters, and he kind of made himself like a Frankenstein monster. The body was still dead, but it was still cool. It's funny because the specials seemed like it was moving fast-paced, but slow at the same time, but it flowed really nicely, which was something a lot of the MCU projects have had a problem with, which this didn't have as much for like a 53-minute short. And I like how Elsa goes in and runs into Jack. Jack's like, well, let's just go our separate ways. We don't need to fight. And then he almost gets killed by the Scottish dude. I think he's Scottish anyways. I like how Elsa ends up kicking that dude's ass, runs into another dude who has like this arrow on his arm, and shoots her at her, misses of course. She kicks his ass, puts an arrow through his neck, cuts off his hand, and I'm like, god damn, Elsa is a badass. And I like how when Jack ends up running into the catacombs where she was, tending to her wounds, we have all these names on the wall, and I thought these would be comic book references, but I think it's just the members of the crew because I couldn't find anything when I was looking up. But I thought that was still pretty cool how they're putting like the members of the crew in the show, which they do for a lot of projects as well. And we find out that Man-Thing is the monster everyone's hunting. Jack's trying to find his friend and get him out of there. I thought Man-Thing was also just really menacing in this because he just grabs like the Scottish guy later and just burns him alive. And I'm like, holy shit. Oh, Man-Thing is cool. And the Bloodstone is weakening him, which I also thought was really interesting because I didn't know that did that. And on top of it, when we found out that Jack wasn't there to hunt the monster and was there to help him, I'm like, I knew something was off about Jack. He just didn't seem like someone that would hunt a monster. He tells Elsa that he should call Man-Thing Ted because that's his name in the comics. His name is Dr. Ted Salas. I think that's how you pronounce it. And he was transformed into Man-Thing after he injected himself with the SO2 serum and crashed his car into a mystical swamp. Because how else would you get swamp powers by going into a swamp? And he guards the Nexus of Realities, which it makes sense. Hey, we're in the multiverse saga, Nexus of Realities. I'm sure he'll come back in some way about that. And of course, Elsa ends up working with Jack to get Man-Thing out of that area, so he gets to escape out of this like maze, and he's free at last. And then we find out that Jack is Werewolf by Night because he tries to touch the Bloodstone, and he kind of just gets stunned and put to the ground because the Bloodstone weakens him and puts him into like a paralyzed state. And of course, then the evil stepmother goes against Elsa and Jack, puts him in a cage so that Jack would kill her, and it all backfires on them right away because as soon as he transforms and they force him to transform, the transformation looked cool as shit, and he jumps out of the cage and just absolutely decimates everyone. And I'm like, dude, these guys are monster hunters. They're weak as shit. And then when Elsa gets out, she goes against the hunters while he's fighting all like the little minions. Elsa kicks all their asses. She slices someone's neck with the sword, does the head chop with the sword. This was so bloody, even though it was all black and white, it was so bloody. And I loved it because it was different. It was something different. And it was violent characters in the MCU, which means we have a good chance that we'll get other violent characters. The Blade movie probably won't shy away from the blood. If we get Punisher, it'll be like Punisher, and that's what I want to see. And I like after they're all fighting, Werewolf by Night looks like he's going to kill Elsa. He smells her, leaves after she says Jack, and then as the evil stepmothers come in to try to take on Elsa, Man-Thing comes in out of nowhere and just grabs her and just toasts her. I'm like, Man-Thing is so OP, and he's so cool, and I like it was like, Elsa's just like, yeah, he went that way, and he just kind of leaves. Man-Thing is a G. And I like when she goes and sits in the chair afterwards, we finally get that color. So Elsa's wearing her orange jacket, which is comic booky because she does wear an orange suit in the comics. I was hoping that her hair would be red, but I feel like that's going to change because in the comics, her hair was blonde and then it was red. So I'm assuming that she might get the red hair eventually. I just want to see red hair. All the red hair characters we ever get are always just different hair colors. I'm like, I just want to see what she would look like in the comics. But Laura Donnelly did an amazing job. And I can see her as Elsa Bloodstone, and I want more of her. When it was finishing, I'm like, I better get to see Man-Thing in color, because I want to see what he would look like in color, and we get to see him in color, hanging out with Werewolf by Night. After everything that went on, they're just hanging out in the forest, having some coffee, hanging out, talking about getting food, and I'm like, They are bros, and I want to see more Man-Thing and Werewolf by Night in some supernatural movie. That's what I want. I want more supernatural, because the supernatural is always cool, and you got all these different monsters in the MCU that we could see. And I really hope that the MCU brings them into the more into the prominent universe, maybe in a Doctor Strange movie, maybe in a Blade movie, Moon Knight, stuff like that, so we get to see more of these characters. I absolutely love this, and I think it'll be really cool to see some of these more monstrous characters show up now that we've been introduced to the monster side of the MCU. What do you think of Werewolf by Night? How do you feel about the way they treated some of the characters? Let me know down in the comments. And what Easter eggs did you notice? Because I don't know as much about the monster side of the Marvel Universe, I wasn't able to pick up as much as I wish I could have been, but I'm interested in learning what else there was. And I can't wait to find out what else there is to talk about from this movie, because I feel like there's going to be a bunch of discussions now because of how different it was based on the rest of the MCU. If you guys watch this video all the way through and you like content just like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button. It helps a lot. You know, we got so much more Marvel to talk about, DC and all that. So I'll talk to you guys later, and I hope you all have a great day.